Retired rancher finds horse chained to tree with note. The truth behind it shocked everyone. Dust swirls beneath the cottonwoods. A widowed rancher stares at a starving mar, ribs sharp as knives. Chained to bark with a crude message knotted in its mane. This horse belongs to a murderer. Do not let him ride again. The church bell tolls. Keys rattle at the sheriff's hip. Town whispers turn to shouts. Whose horse is this? And why does every railman in town want it gone? The rancher's hands tremble on the reins, torn between law and conscience. Yet when he follows the tracks into the hills, the truth he uncovers is darker than the note dared to say a boy accused. A family's honor broken, a railroad's greed hidden in blood. Thunder rolls, hooves pound. The rancher must choose, surrender peace, or fight for justice. But if the horse carries the secret of a killing, then what will happen when that secret finally rides into town? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mateo. Mickord's weathered hands as he worked the fence post back into place. Years of mending broken fences had taught him the rhythm of it. Dig, steady, tamp down. His muscles might not be what they used to be, but they remembered the motions well enough. A strange sound caught his attention, carrying on the breeze from the direction of the cottonwood grove, near his stream. It wasn't the usual melody of water over stones or wind through leaves. This was different, a restless shuffling, followed by what sounded like metal striking wood. Mateo straightened slowly, his back protesting the movement. He set his shovel against the repaired fence post and listened. There it was again. Something wasn't right down by those cottonwoods. The walk to the grove took longer than it might have in his younger days. His boots crunched through the dry grass as he approached, trying to move quiet-like despite his stiff joints. The sound grew clearer, the unmistakable jangle of chain and the nervous stamping of hooves. When he rounded the largest cottonwood, his heart nearly stopped. There stood a bay mare, chained cruel and tight to the trunk. Her coat, which should have gleamed rich brown in the afternoon light, was dull and caked with dust. Her ribs showed plain as fence posts through her hide, and her eyes rolled white, with fear when she caught his scent. "Easy there, girl," Mateo murmured, keeping his voice soft and steady. "Easy now." He approached slowly, one hand extended, palm up. The Mara's nostrils flared, but she held still, watching him. That's when he noticed the paper, tied rough to her tangled mane with a piece of twine. His fingers trembled slightly as he worked the knot free. The message was scratched in harsh black letters. "This horse belongs to a murderer. Do not let him ride again." Mateo's throat went dry. He looked at the mare again, taking in the signs of neglect, the unmistakable marks of someone who'd wanted to make sure she couldn't follow. His heart ached at the cruelty of it. "Not your fault what your master might have done," he said softly, reaching out to stroke her neck. The mare flinched at first, then gradually relaxed under his gentle touch. "Let's get you out of these chains." It took some doing. The links were wound tight, and rust had settled into the joints. Mateo's old fingers worked carefully, speaking low words of comfort whenever the mare grew restless. Finally, the chain fell away, leaving ugly marks where it had pressed against her hide. "Come on now," he coaxed, fishing a length of rope from his pocket. He always carried some habit from decades of ranch work. "Let's get you somewhere proper." The mare followed him willingly enough, though she started at every rustle of leaves or call of a distant bird. Mateo kept the lead rope slack, letting her set the pace. The walk to his barn was slow, but he reckoned that was just fine. Rushing never did anyone any good, least of all a frightened horse. Inside the barn, the familiar smells of hay and leather seemed to calm the mare somewhat. Mateo led her into an empty stall, making sure she had fresh water and good feed before stepping back to really look her over. "What sort of trouble are you mixed up in, girl?" he wondered aloud, studying her condition in the fading daylight. "You'd need to fetch a lantern soon." The sun was setting, painting the barn boards gold through the high windows. Later, as the evening deepened into proper night, Mateo stood in the stall with a curry brush, working the dried mud from the marais. Coat. The lantern hanging from a beam cast warm light over them both. His supper sat forgotten on the kitchen table. He'd been headed in to eat when he'd heard the marais whinnying, and somehow brushing her down had seemed more important than cold beans. And cornbread. Each stroke of the brush revealed more of her true color, and bit by bit, the marais' tension eased. When he found a particularly itchy spot, she turned her head to lip at his sleeve in gratitude. "You're welcome," he said softly, pausing to scratch under her forelock. "Reckon you and me both could use some company." The note weighed heavy in his pocket, its words troubling his thoughts. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make sure this horse couldn't be followed, couldn't lead anyone back to wherever she'd come from. But why? And what was this about a murderer? Mateo had lived long enough to know that sometimes the simplest answer wasn't the right one. He'd need wisdom to figure this out, and there was only one place he knew to find that. So, as he worked, he prayed quietly, asking for guidance, for clarity about what to do next. The marais' soft wicker interrupted his thoughts. She turned to watch him with eyes that seemed clearer now, more trusting. Whatever happened next, Mateo knew one thing for certain. He'd care for her until the truth came to light, whatever that truth might be. Morning light painted the hills gold as Mateo led the bay marais from his barn. She looked better after a night of rest and good feed, though the marks from the chain still showed angry against her coat. He saddled her carefully, noting how she tensed at the cinch but didn't fight it. Whoever had trained her had done right. By her, at least in the beginning. "Easy now," he murmured, mounting slowly. "We're just heading to town to have Mr. Samuels look you over." The marais moved well under him, despite her condition. Her gait was smooth, showing the kind of training that came from hours of patient work. They'd gone about a mile when Mateo spotted Clint Hobbs checking his fence line. Clint straightened as they approached, squinting against the morning sun. His weather-beaten face twisted into a frown as he studied the horse. "That's a cursed mount." "You're riding, McCord," he called out, taking a step back from the fence. "Heard tell it belonged to that Apache boy who killed Jenkins." Mateo kept his voice even. "Horse ain't cursed. Just needs care is all." "Mark my words," Clint muttered, spitting into the dust. "No good comes from mixing in other folks' troubles." The rest of the ride passed quietly, but Mateo could feel eyes on them as they approached town. Women on porches bent their heads together, whispering. Men stopped their morning tasks to stare. By the time they reached the livery stable, it seemed the whole town knew about the mysterious Bay Marais. Old Mr. Samuels was already waiting, his lined face grave beneath his gray hair. He watched silently as Mateo dismounted and led the horse. "Forward. Recognize her?" Mateo asked, though he could see the answer in the liveryman's eyes. Samuels nodded slowly. "That's Daniel's horse, all right." Young Apache hand who worked odd jobs around town. He ran a gentle hand down the marais' neck. "Good boy, that one. Quiet-like, but knew his way around horses better than most twice his age." Then Jenkins, that railroad foreman, turned up dead 3 weeks back. Daniel vanished same night, ain't been seen since. Before Mateo could respond, boot heels clicked on the wooden floor. Sheriff Briggs stepped into the stable, his badge catching the light that streamed through the door. "McCord," the sheriff said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "That horse is evidence in a murder investigation. Need you to turn her over." Mateo stood his ground, one hand resting on the marais. "Shoulder. Found her chained to a cottonwood on my land, Sheriff." Near starved. He met Briggs' hard stare. "Law says a man's responsible for stock he finds suffering on his property. Law also says to cooperate with a murder investigation," Briggs countered. "That horse might lead us to Daniel." "Might do," Mateo agreed mildly. "But she won't lead anyone anywhere in her current state. Need to build her strength back up first." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "This isn't a request, McCord. That boy killed a white man. Railroad's breathing down my neck for justice." "Accused," Mateo corrected quietly. "Not proven guilty yet." A tense silence filled the stable. Even the marais seemed to sense it. shifting uneasily under Mateo's hand. Finally, Sheriff Briggs spoke. Again, his voice low and dangerous. "You're making a mistake, old man. Don't get yourself tied up in this business." Mateo stood steady. "I aim to care for this horse proper until the truth comes to light. That's all." The sheriff turned on his heel and strode out, leaving the threat unspoken but clear. Mr. Samuels let out a long breath. "She's sound enough," the liverman said, running practiced hands down the Mare's legs. "Eat her up slow, mind. Too much too fast could founder her." Mateo nodded his thanks, leading the horse back into the morning sun. The ride home felt longer, weighted down with what he'd learned. Daniel? He remembered the boy now, though they'd never spoken more than a few words in passing. Always respectful. Quick to offer help with horses. It didn't fit with murder, but Mateo had lived long enough to know that appearances could deceive. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Mateo curry-combed the Mare in the barn. The steady strokes of the brush matched the rhythm of his prayers. "Lord," he said softly, "guide me in this. Show me the right path." Coyotes called in the distance, their voices rising and falling like questions in the gathering dark. The Mare pressed against him, seeking comfort or offering it. He wasn't sure which. Gout gnawed at his gut like a hungry thing. Was he doing right by this animal? Or had pride made him stubborn? Was he protecting an innocent creature? Or had he tied himself to something darker? The Mare nudged his shoulder gently, as if sensing his troubled thoughts. Mateo sighed, giving her one last pat before hanging up the curry-comb that Sunday, dawn clear and cool. The kind of autumn morning that painted the hills in shades of gold and crimson. Mateo, dressed in his best shirt, the faded blue one his wife had always said brought out his eyes. The Mare watched him through the barn door as he approached with brush and saddle. "Reckon you're coming to church with me today," he told her softly, working the curry-comb over her coat. She'd filled out some the past few days, though her ribs still showed. The marks from the chain were healing, leaving pale lines against her dark bay hide. The town church sat on a gentle rise, its white-painted walls gleaming in the morning sun. Mateo could hear the hymns floating out through open windows as he approached. He tied the Mare carefully to the hitching post, making sure she had shade and water within reach inside. The wooden pews creaked with familiar weight as people shifted. To watch him enter, Mrs. Peterson leaned close to whisper something to her daughter. Tom Wilson, who'd always greeted Mateo warmly before, suddenly found the handle fascinating. Even the children, usually squirming and restless, sat still, and wide-eyed Reverend Cole stood at the pulpit, steady and dignified in his black coat. His sermon spoke of mercy and judgment, of the difficulty in knowing God's will. His eyes found Mateo's more than once during the message. After the final Amen, as people gathered in small clusters to share news and pleasantries, the Reverend made his way through the crowd to where Mateo stood. "Brother McCord," he said quietly, "might I have a word?" They stepped out onto the church's small side porch, away from curious ears. The Mare dozed in the autumn sun, one hind foot cocked in rest. "That's the horse, then?" Reverend Cole asked, though it wasn't really a question. "It is." The preacher sighed, running a hand over his graying hair. "Mateo, you've served this community faithfully for decades. Raised a family here, buried your dear Sarah here. You've earned your peace." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This business with the railroad foreman, it's bigger than a lost horse. The railroad brings progress, jobs, connection to the wider world. They have influence in high places." "They surely do," Mateo agreed mildly. "I'm trying to say, Reverend." Cole's voice dropped lower. "Sometimes wisdom means letting others handle matters that don't directly concern us. You've done your Christian duty by saving the animal. Perhaps now it's time to step back." Mateo looked out over the churchyard, where children played under their parents' watchful eyes. He could almost hear Sarah's voice, clear as the day she'd last spoken it. "Do right, even when it costs you." His jaw tightened. "Much obliged for your concern, Reverend. I'll surely keep it in mind." The preacher recognized the gentle but firm dismissal. He squeezed Mateo's shoulder once before heading back inside to his congregation. The ride home seemed longer than usual, the Mare's hoofbeats marking time with Mateo's troubled thoughts. The autumn sun was setting by the time he sat down to his solitary supper of beans and cornbread. The note from the horse's mane lay beside his plate, its crude message stark against the worn oilcloth. This horse belongs to a murderer. Do not let him ride again. Mateo studied the writing as he ate. The letters were uneven, rushed, nothing. Like the careful hand he remembered from the day Daniel had helped him fill out livestock papers at the general store. The young Apache's writing had been neat, almost elegant. This looked more like someone trying to disguise their natural hand. Later, kneeling beside his bed for evening prayers, Mateo wrestled with his conscience. The loss had turned over the horse. The railroad wanted its justice. Even the Reverend counseled letting it be, but something wasn't right about any of it. The hidden horse, the false-seeming note, the rush to judgment against a boy whose only crime might have been his heritage. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, show me the path of righteousness here. Give me wisdom to know it and courage to walk it. Dawn brought frost, turning the pasture grass to crystal. Mateo's breath made clouds in the cold air as he carried his saddle to the barn. The Mare nickered a greeting, pressing her soft muzzle against his shoulder. Time we learn more about this trouble you're in, he told her, cinching the saddle tight. She stood steady, as if understanding the importance of the day ahead. Your boy Daniel might be in need of help, and I aim to find out why. The livery? Stable's familiar sense of hay and leather greeted Mateo as he stepped inside from the bright morning sun. Old Mr. Samuels hunched over his workbench, carefully oiling a set of reins. He glanced up, his weathered face tightening at the sight of Mateo. Figured you might be back, Samuel said, setting aside his work. That Mare's still giving you trouble? The Mare's doing fine. Mateo moved closer, keeping his voice low. But I need to know more about when Daniel had her here. Samuels wiped his hands on his leather apron, eyes darting to the stable door before speaking. Ain't much to tell. Boy brought her in one evening, asked me to keep her safe for a spell, said he'd return by morning. The old man's shoulders slumped. Never did see him after that. What happened that night? Railroad men were in town, drinking heavy at Murphy's saloon. They were shouting then. Samuel shook his head. By sunrise, their foreman was dead in the street, and Daniel was gone. Mateo nodded slowly. Mind if I look at that tack he left? Samuels hesitated, then shuffled to a back corner. He returned with a worn saddle blanket folded over his arm. This was with the Mare when he brought her. Mateo took the blanket carefully, running his fingers over the fabric. There, along one edge, delicate beadwork caught the light, intricate patterns in blue and white, nearly hidden in the wools. Weave. He recognized the distinctive Apachemanship, the kind of detail that marked something his family made precious. This belonged to his people, Mateo said softly. His kin made this. The crunch of boots on gravel outside made them both turn. A man in a fine black coat stepped into the stable, his polished shoes incongruous against the dirt floor. Mateo recognized Mr. Coulter, the railroad's land agent, though they'd never spoken directly. Well. Coulter's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mr. McCord, isn't it? I hear you've taken quite an interest in our local murder case. Just caring for a horse that needed help, Mateo replied evenly. That horse is evidence in a criminal investigation. Coulter stepped closer, his voice dropping to a silky whisper. The Apache boy killed our foreman in cold blood, then ran like the coward he is. You're only making things worse by interfering. Seems to me there might be more to the story. The story? Coulter's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. The story is progress, Mr. McCord. The railroad brings civilization to these territories. We can't let savages and their sympathizers stand in the way of that progress. He straightened his coat lapels. I strongly suggest you turn that horse over to proper authorities before you find yourself on the wrong side of the law. Mateo met the agent's cold stare. I reckon I'll keep caring for her until the truth comes out. Your choice. Coulter turned to leave, then paused. But remember, in these parts, the railroad has a long memory for those who oppose it. The threat hung in the air like smoke as Coulter strode out. Samuels let out a shaky breath. Lord above, Mateo, you're poking a hornet's nest here. Maybe so. Mateo carefully folded the beaded blanket. But something ain't right about all this. That evening, in the quiet of his ranch house, Mateo sat at his kitchen table with paper and ink. The lamp cast warm light as he carefully composed his letter to the Indian agent at the White Mountain Apache reservation. He described Daniel, the horse, the circumstances of the boy's disappearance. His pen scratched steadily across the page, as he requested any information about the young man's family or current whereabouts. The letter complete, Mateo held it up to the lamplight, knowing it would be weeks before any reply could reach him. The mail wagon only passed through town twice a month, and the reservation was 3 days' hard ride away. Lord, he prayed softly, setting the letter aside to dry. Grant me patience in this waiting. Show me how to help this boy if helping's what you want of me. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the darkened pasture. In the barn, the Mare's soft nickering answered, as if she too waited for word of her missing rider. The spring days stretched. Longer, but darkness seemed to creep closer to Mateo's ranch. Whispers in town grew into shouts, spreading like wildfire through the community that had once welcomed him as neighbor and friend. One bright afternoon, while Mateo mended a broken stall door, the sound of children's laughter drew his attention. Not the usual happy play sounds, but something harder, meaner. He stepped out of the barn, just as stones clattered against his corral fence, making the Mare dance sideways in alarm. Murder horse, murder horse. 3 boys, not more than 12 years old, stood at the edge of his property, arms full of rocks. Their faces showed a mixture of fear and cruel excitement as they took aim again. That's enough now, Mateo called out firmly, walking toward them. The boys scattered like quail, but not before one last stone struck the corral post with a sharp crack. Mateo's heart ached as he watched them run. He remembered when those same children used to beg for rides on his gentlest ponies, their parents chatting easily over coffee on his porch. Now doors closed when he rode past and conversations died when he entered the general store. The crunch of wagon wheels on his drive pulled him from these thoughts. Clint Hobbs, his nearest neighbor to the west, drew his team to a halt. The man's usually friendly face was drawn tight with worry. Afternoon, Mateo, Clint said, not climbing down. Been meaning to have a word. Come in for coffee? Mateo offered, though he could guess the answer. Best not. Clint shifted uncomfortably on his seat. Look here, we've known each other 15 years. I respect you, and that's why I'm saying this plain. You're fixing to lose every friend you've got, siding with savages over your own kind. Daniel's got as much right to fair treatment as anyone, Mateo replied quietly. Being Apache don't make him guilty. Don't matter if he's guilty. Or not anymore, Clint insisted. Railroads bring in progress, jobs, future for our children. Can't let Indian troubles slow that down. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. That boy killed a white man. You keep defending him, folks will start wondering where your loyalties? Lie. My loyalty's to what's right, Clint, same as always. Ain't that simple anymore. Clint gathered his reins. Times are changing. Best change with them. He clicked to his horses and turned away, leaving Mateo in a cloud of dust. Doubt gnawed at Mateo's gut as he watched his neighbor disappear down the road. Was he being foolish? The evidence did point to Daniel's guilt. His sudden disappearance, the timing of the foreman's death. Yet something about the whole situation felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces forced where they didn't belong. The sun was setting when Mateo finally sat down to his solitary supper. The beef stew had gone cold. Well, he'd been lost in thought, pushing it around his plate without appetite. A sharp stamping from outside caught his attention. The Mare, usually calm at evening feeding, was moving restlessly in her stall, setting aside his barely touched meal. Mateo grabbed his lantern and headed out. The horse's eyes rolled white. In the darkness as he approached, something had spooked her badly. The lantern light swept across his gate, catching on something new. Crude letters had been carved into a wooden board, nailed high where it couldn't be missed. Traitor. Mateo's hands trembled slightly as he pulled the sign down, but not from fear. A strange calm settled over him, like the quiet after a storm. The ugly word seemed to sharpen his resolve rather than weaken it. He moved to the Mare's stall, speaking softly until her nervous dancing ceased. Her velvet nose pressed against his palm as he stroked her neck, the same gentle trust she'd shown since that first day by the cottonwood. "Don't you fret," he whispered, more to himself than the horse. "We'll see the truth through, whatever it costs." The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Mateo remembered his wife's favorite scripture, about standing firm when tested. She would have understood this choice, he realized. Would have been right beside him, defending what was right against what was easy. The Mare's soft nickering brought him back to the present. He checked her water, added an extra measure of hay, and made sure the stall was secure. The trader sign he broke into pieces, tossing them into his kindling box. Let them fuel tomorrow's morning fire. He had no use for their message of hate. Back in his kitchen, the cold stew still waited, but Mateo found his appetite had returned. There was strength in knowing your path, even when it led uphill. He would face whatever came next with the same quiet dignity. He hoped to restore to Daniel's name. Morning brought a sharp chill to the air as Mateo saddled his horse. The bay Mare. He left safely in her stall. She wasn't ready for mountain climbing yet. His old buckskin gelding, steady as sunrise, would serve better for searching the rough country. He packed light but careful. Coffee, jerky, his worn Bible, and a blanket. Roll. The Winchester stayed home. If Daniel was out there, Mateo wanted no hint of threat about him. Besides, the weight of the rifle would only slow his search through the hills. Frost sparkled on the sage as he rode out, following the creek that wound up into the high country. By mid-morning, thin clouds gathered overhead, and the first few snowflakes began drifting down. Not enough to stick, but enough to remind him winter wasn't finished with these hills yet. The buckskin's hooves crunched through patches of old snow as they climbed higher. Mateo kept his eyes on the ground, reading sign the way his father had taught him long ago. Deer tracks crossed their path, along with rabbit and coyote. But he was looking for something else near noon, where the creek bent sharp around a granite boulder. Mateo spotted what he'd been hoping for. There, in a patch of damp sand, lay two distinct tracks, one a barefoot print, clear as daylight, the other made by a worn boot heel. Fresh, too. The morning's light snow hadn't filled them yet. His heart quickened. Someone was up here, someone trying not to be found. The barefoot prints spoke of Indian ways, walking silent through rough country. The boot prints suggested someone else, maybe helping, maybe hunting. Either way, it was the first real sign. He'd found. Mateo dismounted, leading his horse as he followed the tracks. They led away from the creek, up a narrow draw, thick with pine and juniper. The going was slower now, but he didn't mind. Rushing would only alert whoever was hiding, Anne. Hour later, in a sheltered hollow, he found more signs. Scraps of paper that once held food, carried by the wind into a thorny bush. A threadbare blanket, carefully folded and tucked beneath an overhanging rock. Someone was living rough up here, but living all the same. The snow fell steadier now, and the light was failing. Much as he wanted to press on, Mateo knew better than to risk getting lost in darkness. He found a small clearing, sheltered by thick pines, and made his camp. The fire he built small and low, just enough to heat coffee and ward off the growing cold. As shadows lengthened across the snow, he pulled out his Bible. The pages fell open to Psalms, worn smooth by years of evening, reading with Sarah. His throat tightened at the memory of her sitting beside him, firelight playing across her silver hair. Without thinking, he began humming the old hymn she loved best, Be Thou My Vision. The gentle melody drifted up through the pines, mixing with the soft pat of snow on branches. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its lonely voice echoing off the hillsides. Mateo felt it then, eyes watching from the shadows. Not threatening, but careful, weighing and measuring him. He kept his movements slow and predictable. As he poured another cup of coffee, let them look their fill. Trust needed time to grow, like spring grass after winter. He didn't call out or make any sign he knew he had company. That wasn't what was needed here. Instead, he turned another page in his Bible and read by firelight, letting the familiar words of comfort fill the silence. If Daniel was out there watching, let him see there was still one place where he might find welcome. The snow continued, falling, dusting Mateo's blanket and turning the surrounding woods to a soft white silence. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For now, it was enough to have found sign of life. To know his faith in Daniel's innocence might not be misplaced after all, thought the unseen watcher remained as Mateo banked his fire for the night. As he settled into his blanket roll, the owl called. Once more, closer now. Or perhaps it wasn't an owl at all, but a signal passed between those who had reason to hide. Either way, Mateo slept soundly, trusting that when the time was right, truth would find its way into the light. Dawn crept cold and gray across the mountain slopes. Mateo stirred the coals of his small fire, warming his hands before saddling. Up to continue the search. The fresh snow from yesterday had stopped, leaving behind 3 inches of white powder that sparkled in the weak morning light. He found the tracks again easily enough. They stood dark against the new snow, leading up toward a maze of granite outcrops. The buckskin picked its way carefully along the trail as Mateo steadied the sign. The boot prints were stumbling now, weaving like a man exhausted or hurt. The path wound higher through stands of pine and past tumbled boulders until it dead-ended. At a steep rock face, Mateo dismounted, his joints creaking in the cold. He ground-tied the horse and continued on foot, following scuff marks in the snow that led toward a dark opening beneath an overhanging ledge. Something moved in the shadows. Mateo caught the glint of steel, a hunting knife held in trembling hands. Then he made out the figure pressed against the rock wall. Daniel, looking more boy than man, his face gaunt with hunger and fear. His buckskin shirt hung in tatters, and his feet were wrapped in strips of cloth. The knife wavered as Daniel's eyes darted between Mateo and the path behind him, searching for others who might have followed. His breath came in ragged clouds in the frigid air. Mateo lifted his empty hands slowly, palms out. Easy now, he said, keeping his voice gentle as he would with a spooked horse. I came alone. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the knife handle. He looked ready to bolt, though there was nowhere to run. Your horse misses you, Mateo continued softly. That Baymar? She's been eating my hay and watching the hills, waiting for you to come back. At the mention of his horse, something shifted in Daniel's eyes. The knife point dipped slightly. She's safe? His voice was rough from disuse. Safe and getting stronger every day. Though she'd rather have you brushing her than me. Daniel swayed on his feet, the last of his strength giving out. The knife clattered to the rocky ground as his legs buckled. Mateo lunged forward, catching him before he could fall. The boy felt like nothing in his arms, all bone and trembling muscle. Let's get you home, Mateo said, half carrying Daniel, to where the buckskin waited. It took all his strength to lift the semi-conscious youth into the saddle. He wrapped his own coat around Daniel's shoulders before mounting up behind him. The ride down was slow and careful through the drifting snow. Mateo kept one arm around Daniel to hold him steady, feeling the fever heat radiating through the borrowed coat. The boy drifted in and out, sometimes muttering in Apache, sometimes silent except for the chattering of his teeth. The short winter day was fading to dusk by the time they reached Mateo's ranch. The Baymar whinnied a greeting as they rode into the yard, and Daniel stirred at the familiar sound. Inside the house, Mateo built up the fire in the cook stove while Daniel huddled in a kitchen chair, wrapped in every blanket Mateo could find. The boy's eyes followed Mateo's movements warily as he heated chicken broth left from yesterday's supper. Small sips, Mateo cautioned, pressing the warm cup into Daniel's shaking hands. Too much too fast will make you sick. Daniel nodded, drinking carefully. Some color began returning to his face as the warmth spread through him. His eyelids grew heavy as the heat and food did their work. Mateo helped him to the small bedroom. Off the kitchen, Sarah's sewing room once, now spare but clean, with a narrow bed. Daniel was asleep almost before his head touched the pillow. Just as Mateo turned to leave, Daniel's voice came soft and slurred with exhaustion. I didn't kill him. A pause, then even softer. But they'll never believe me. Mateo stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of Daniel's chest. We'll sort it out, he said quietly, though the boy was already asleep. Rest now. You're safe here. He closed the door gently and went to tend to the horses. Mara pressed her nose against his shoulder, as if in thanks. Outside, snow began falling again, covering their tracks, while inside, Daniel slept the deep sleep of one who had finally found shelter from the storm. The kerosene lamp cast a warm glow across Mateo's kitchen table as he set down 2 steaming cups of coffee. Daniel had woken from his fevered sleep an hour ago, and though still weak, his eyes were clearer now. He wrapped his hands around the cup, seeking its warmth. Much obliged, Daniel murmured, his voice stronger after the rest and broth. The lamplight caught the shadows under his eyes, making him look older than his 17 years. Mateo settled into his chair, waiting. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words. The clock on the wall ticked steadily while outside. The wind whispered through pine needles. Finally, Daniel lifted his gaze from the coffee cup. I reckon you want to know what happened. Only if you're ready to tell it, Mateo said quietly. Daniel's fingers tightened around the cup. It ain't what they say about the foreman, He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. My sister, Maria, she was at our camp that evening, working on her beadwork. I'd gone to check the horses. His voice grew strained. When I came back, I heard her crying out. The foreman, he had her pinned against a wagon wheel. She was fighting him, but he was too strong. Mateo's jaw clenched, but he kept his expression calm, not wanting to interrupt. I pulled him off her, Daniel continued. We fought. I ain't proud, but I hit him hard. Then a worker came running up. Everything happened so fast after that. Daniel's hands trembled slightly, rippling the coffee in his cup. The worker had a length of pipe. He swung it, meaning to hit me, but the foreman was getting up right then. Understanding dawned in Mateo's eyes. The pipe struck the foreman instead of you. Daniel nodded, his shoulders slumping. Killed him right there. But before I could even think, the worker was yelling that I'd done it. More men came running. Maria screamed at me to run. His voice cracked. So I ran, like a coward. No, Mateo said firmly. Like a brother protecting his sister. And like someone who knew the truth wouldn't matter to them. The worker who killed him, he's been with the railroad for years. They want our grazing land. For their new line, Daniel's eyes held a deep weariness. Who would believe an Apache boy over a white railroad man? Mateo leaned forward. I believe you, son. Those 3 words seemed to hit Daniel like a physical force. He bowed his head, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Maria, I don't even know if she's safe. Had to leave her there. We'll find her, Mateo assured him. But first we need to clear your name. The sheriff needs to hear this truth. Fear flickered across Daniel's face. Sheriff Briggs works for whoever pays best. The railroads got him in their pocket deep as anyone. Then we'll need help from others who know right from wrong. Mateo's voice held steady confidence, though inside he felt the weight of what they faced. Standing against the railroad wouldn't be easy. Friends would turn away. Threats would come. But Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Do right, even when it costs you. Why are you helping me? Daniel asked suddenly. You don't even know me. Mateo was quiet for a moment, considering. Because 30 years ago, someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. Changed my whole life. Sometimes the Lord puts us in places where we can pass that kindness on. Daniel studied him with those dark, serious eyes. The railroad men, they'll come after you too. Let them come. Mateo's voice was calm but firm. Truth's got a way of standing its ground if we stand with it. Exhaustion was creeping back into Daniel's face. Mateo stood and gathered their cups. Time for more rest. Tomorrow we can talk about what comes next. Daniel nodded, swaying slightly as he rose. But at the bedroom door he paused. Would you pray with me? My grandmother always said prayer steadies a troubled heart. Of course. Mateo bowed his head. Lord, we thank you for bringing this boy to safety. Guide us in the days ahead. Help us hold to truth when lies seem stronger. And Lord, watch over his sister Maria wherever she may be. When he finished, Daniel's amen was barely audible, his eyes heavy with sleep. Mateo helped him back to bed, where he was asleep. Almost instantly, Dot standing in the kitchen afterward. Mateo watched snow falling outside the window. The sheriff's wrath would come soon enough. The railroad's threats would follow. But for now, a boy who had carried too heavy a burden slept safely under his roof. Sometimes, Mateo reflected, that was enough reason to face whatever storms might come. The lamp sputtered low as he sat down to plan their next steps. Outside, the bay mare whickered softly in the barn, while inside, Daniel's steady breathing spoke of the deepest kind of trust, that of one who had finally found someone willing to believe his truth. The morning sun warmed Mateo's yard as he demonstrated the proper angle for splitting logs. Daniel stood beside him, his strength returning after 2 days of rest and good meals. The boy's hands were steady now as he gripped the axe handle. Like this? Daniel asked, positioning his feet. The way Mateo had shown him. That's right, let the weight of the axe do most of the work. Mateo stepped back, watching as Daniel swung. The log split clean down the middle, both halves falling neatly to either side. A smile tugged at Daniel's lips. The first real one, Mateo had seen. There was dignity in honest work, in being trusted with tools and tasks. They worked together through the morning, the steady thunk of axe against wood creating a peaceful rhythm. Around noon, movement at the edge of the property caught Mateo's eye. 2 figures approached on foot, women, one supporting the other. Daniel dropped his axe, squinting against the sun. Maria! He rushed forward as his sister emerged from the tree line, accompanied by an older Apache woman Mateo didn't recognize. Maria stumbled into her brother's arms, tears streaming down her face. Taza, she whispered, using his Apache name. Her dress was travel-worn, but she appeared unharmed. The older woman introduced herself as Grace Running Deer, who had helped Maria escape the railroad camp and hide at the reservation. The spirits guided us here, she said simply, nodding to Mateo. We heard whispers of a kind rancher who took in Daniel's horse. Mateo invited them inside, where Maria hugged her brother again, checking him for injuries. When they said you'd disappeared into the hills, I feared. She couldn't finish the sentence. Mateo found me, Daniel said softly. Brought me here, gave me shelter, believed my story. Maria turned to Mateo, her eyes bright with tears. Thank you, she whispered, for saving my brother, for believing him when no one else would. Mateo ducked his head, embarrassed by her gratitude. Anyone with eyes to see and ears to hear would have done the same? No, Maria said firmly. They wouldn't. We know that too well. Grace needed to. Returned to the reservation before dark, but she agreed to spread word quietly that Maria was safe. After she left, Mateo heated up coffee while Maria and Daniel spoke softly in Apache, catching up on the days they'd been separated. The afternoon passed peacefully. Maria helped prepare supper while Daniel finished stacking the wood he'd split. By evening, the 3 gathered around Mateo's table, sharing a simple stew of beef and vegetables. The fire crackled in the hearth as they ate, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Mateo watched the siblings, how they kept glancing at each other, as if making sure the other was still there. Their relief at being reunited was almost tangible. Tomorrow's Sunday, Mateo said finally, setting down his spoon. I've been thinking on what needs doing. Maria and Daniel both looked up, tension creeping back into their shoulders. The truth needs telling, Mateo continued. And church service is where most folks gather to hear truth spoken. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I am to stand up tomorrow and tell what really happened, but I won't do it without your say-so. Daniel's hands clenched in his lap. The railroad men might be there. Likely will be, Mateo agreed, along with Sheriff Briggs and others who've already made up their minds, but there'll also be good people there. Folks who'll listen if we give them the chance. Maria reached for her brother's hand. It's your choice, Taza, but hiding truth has never served our people well. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he straightened his shoulders. I'll go. I'll face them. We'll face them together, Mateo corrected gently. They spent the rest of the evening planning what to say, how to present the truth in a way that couldn't be twisted. The fire burned low as they talked, and Mateo felt hope stirring, fragile as a sparrow's wing. But present, still, as he lay in bed that night, the weight of what they planned pressed heavy on his shoulders. Standing against the railroad meant standing against money, power, and deep-rooted prejudice. Good folks might turn away. Threats might come to more than just his gate, but when he thought of Daniel's quiet dignity while chopping wood, of Maria's tears of gratitude, he knew tomorrow's risk was worth facing. Sarah's words echoed in his mind one more time. Do right, even when it costs you. Outside his window, an owl called softly in the darkness. Inside, he heard Daniel's soft footsteps as the boy checked on his sister one more time. Small sounds, a family of trust, of hope, powerful enough to face whatever morning might bring. Dawn broke cold and clear that Sunday morning. Mateo stood at his kitchen window, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind him, Daniel finished the last of his coffee, his hand steady, but his eyes betraying his nervousness. Time to saddle up, Mateo said. Softly, setting his own empty cup in the wash basin, Maria touched her brother's shoulder. I'll follow on foot, she said. Better we don't all arrive together. Outside, frost crunched under their boots as they crossed to the barn. The mare nickered a greeting, her breath visible in the chilly air. Mateo noticed how she leaned into Daniel's touch as he bridled her, the bond between them still strong, despite their separation. We'll ride double, Mateo said, checking the cinch. Save your strength for what's ahead. They mounted carefully, Daniel behind Mateo, and set out toward town. The morning air bit sharp and clean in their lungs. Fence posts cast long shadows across the trail, and birds called their morning song from the scrub brush dot as they approached the church. Mateo felt Daniel stiffen. The street was already crowded with wagons and townspeople in their Sunday best. The white clapboard building stood stark against the blue sky, its bell silent in the tower. They hadn't reached the steps when Sheriff Briggs appeared, flanked by 2 deputies. Their hands rested on their gun belts. Behind them stood Mr. Coulter, the railroad agent, wearing a dark suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's far enough, Briggs called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. Mateo reined the mare to a stop, feeling Daniel's hands tighten on his coat. Churchgoers gathered on the steps, faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Some children pointed, only to be hushed by their parents. Mateo McCord, the sheriff continued, pulling a paper from his vest pocket. You're under arrest for harboring a known fugitive. This boy's innocent, Mateo said clearly, wanting his words to carry to the crowd. There's been a grave mistake. Get down from that horse, Briggs interrupted. Both of you. The deputies moved forward, hands still on their weapons. Mateo dismounted first, helping Daniel down after him. The mare shifted nervously, sensing the tension. Please, Mateo tried again. Let me explain to the congregation. Explain it to the judge. Coulter cut in smoothly. He nodded to the deputies. Take them. The first deputy grabbed Mateo's arms, pulling them roughly behind his back. The second reached for Daniel, who flinched but didn't resist. No, Maria's voice rang out as she pushed through the crowd. My brother is innocent. The foreman attacked me. Daniel only tried to protect. That's enough out of you, Briggs snapped. A deputy shoved her aside, making her stumble. Several gasps rose from the crowd. Reverend Cole stepped forward, his face troubled. Sheriff, surely we could hear them out. Law's the law, Reverend, Briggs said firmly. Can't have folks harboring murderers no matter their intentions. Some in the crowd nodded approvingly. Others looked away, uncomfortable. A few women whispered behind their hands, glancing at Maria with mixed pity and suspicion. Mateo felt cold iron close around his wrists as the deputy clapped him in handcuffs. Ahead of him, they were doing the same to Daniel. The boy's face was set in a mask of dignity, but Matteo could see fear in his eyes. "The mare," Matteo called to Maria as they were led away. "Take her to the livery. The horse is evidence now." Coulter interrupted, that same cold smile in place. Property of the railroad, you might say. They were marched down the street toward the jailhouse, church bells beginning to toll behind them. Matteo heard scattered cheers from some townspeople, while others muttered prayers or turned away. Maria's pleading voice faded as distance in the growing crowd. Noise swallowed it. The jail was cold and dim after the bright morning sun. They were separated, Daniel taken to a back cell, while Matteo was locked in one facing the street. Through the barred window, he could hear the town's normal Sunday sounds. Wagon wheels, footsteps, distant hymns from the church dot as evening approached. Voices rose outside. Townspeople arguing about the arrests. Some called Matteo a fool for getting involved. Others defended his right to shelter someone in need. A woman's voice insisted they couldn't just lock up a respected rancher without a proper hearing. A man shouted back that Indian lovers deserved what they got. Matteo knelt on the hard floor of his cell, hands clasped in prayer. "Lord," he whispered, "give us strength to face what's coming. Show these people your truth." The arguments outside grew louder as darkness fell. In the cell behind him, Matteo heard Daniel softly singing what sounded like an Apache prayer song. The sound brought tears to his eyes, not for his own situation, but for a world that would cage a boy for defending his sister's honor. He closed his eyes, Sarah's words echoing in his mind. "Do right, even when it costs you." The price was clear now, measured in iron bars and angry voices, but he couldn't find it in his heart to regret his choice. The jail's shadows stretched long across Matteo's cell floor as another day faded. His bones protested the thin mattress, making sleep fitful and rest elusive. 4 days had passed since their arrest, each one longer than the last. The iron bars cast stripes of darkness across his weathered hands as he thumbed through his worn pocket Bible in the cell behind his. Daniel sat cross-legged on his own cot, barely speaking except to answer yes or no when the deputy brought their daily meals, but Matteo could sense the boy's quiet strength. It reminded him of the desert plants that bent with the wind rather than breaking. The evening brought familiar sounds, boot steps on wooden sidewalks, horses clip-clopping past, shopkeepers calling goodnight to each other. Then came an unexpected noise, saw footfalls approaching the jail's front door. "Evening, deputy," came Reverend Cole's gentle voice. "Mind if I visit the prisoners?" The deputy grunted. "Make it quick, Reverend. Almost closing time." Matteo rose stiffly as the preacher appeared before his cell. Cole's face was drawn with concern, but his eyes held purpose. "Brother Matteo," he whispered, glancing back to ensure the deputy remained at his desk. "How are you holding up?" "Well enough," Matteo answered quietly. "My joints complain more than my conscience." Cole smiled faintly, then reached into his coat. "I brought you something." He slipped a leather-bound Bible through the bars. "It's marked with verses I thought might bring comfort." Matteo took the book reverently. Thin strips of paper marked several pages. He opened to the first one. "But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." "God's justice is greater than man's," Cole whispered, his voice barely carrying. "Remember that, brother." Matteo nodded, touched by the preacher's courage in visiting them. "Thank you, Reverend. This means more than you know." Cole shifted closer to the bars. "There's talk in town. The railroad's pushing for a quick trial." His expression darkened. They're saying Daniel might hang before the week's out." Matteo's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Then we'll need these verses all the more." The preacher glanced toward Daniel's cell. "How is the boy?" "Strong," Matteo said. "Stronger than most would be." Cole nodded. "Keep faith, both of you. I'll do what I can to rally support." He touched Matteo's hand briefly through the bars. "God's timing isn't always our timing, but his purpose prevails." After the Reverend left, Matteo settled on his cot and began reading the marked passages aloud. His voice carried clearly to Daniel's cell, Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Daniel, he called softly when he finished reading. Would you like to pray together? Yes, came the quiet reply. It was the first word Daniel had spoken all day. Mateo knelt by the bars, separating ourselves. After a moment, he heard Daniel do the same on the other side. Their voices joined in prayer, Mateo's deep and weathered, Daniel's young but firm. Lord, Mateo began, we thank you for Reverend Cole's kindness. We ask for strength to face whatever comes. Help us trust your justice above man's law. Protect Daniel's sister Maria, and help the truth come to light. Amen, Daniel whispered. Through the barred window, Mateo could hear fragments of conversation from passing townspeople. A merchant complained about losing business with the railroad men. A woman wondered aloud if hanging was too harsh for someone so young. Two men argued about whether Mateo had lost his mind, sheltering an accused murderer. They're scared, Mateo said softly to Daniel. Fear makes people forget their better nature. The railroad men visit the sheriff every day, Daniel replied. I hear them talking about a trial. Mateo nodded grimly. They want this finished quick, before the truth can surface. He opened the Bible again, finding another marked passage. But listen to this. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known come to light. The words seemed to settle something in Daniel. His voice grew stronger. My people say that Elias, like a coyote's track, it cannot hide forever from those who know how to read the signs. That's wisdom there, Mateo said. God's truth is like water in the desert. It finds its way to the surface eventually. They fell silent as heavy boots approached. The evening deputy made his rounds, checking locks and peering into cells. After he passed, Mateo heard Daniel shifting on his cot. Mateo, the boy said softly, thank you. For everything. No thanks needed. Son, we'll face this together. The jail grew quiet as night settled over the town. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at shadows. Mateo's joints ached from the cold seeping through the stone walls, but his spirit felt stronger than it had in days. He held on to Reverend Cole's words about God's justice, letting them warm his heart like embers in the growing dark. The fourth morning of their imprisonment dawned cold and gray. Mateo stretched his stiff muscles, wincing at the familiar ache in his joints. The deputy had just brought their morning biscuits when shouts erupted from the street outside. Railroad's been lying to us, a voice carried through the barred window. They're stealing land from honest folk. Mateo rose from his cot, moving closer to listen. The clash of voices grew louder, farmers arguing with railroad men right outside the jail. Where's your proof of ownership, Coulter? That was Ben Tucker's voice, a wheat farmer from the South Valley. Show us these deeds you claim to have. The railroad's authority comes from territorial law, Coulter's smooth voice replied, though it held a note of strain. Progress cannot be stopped by progress, another farmer cut in. Is that what you call threatening folks off their land? Blaming innocent boys for murder? The crowd's anger swelled. Mateo heard Daniel shift in his cell, moving closer to his own window. They're starting to see through him, Mateo said softly. The argument continued outside, voices rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. More townspeople joined the crowd. Questions about Coulter's methods grew bolder, doubts about Daniel's. Guilt more openly expressed near midday. Boots scuffed on the jail's wooden floor. Mateo turned to see Clint Hobbs standing awkwardly by his cell, holding a cloth-wrapped bundle. Brought you some fresh bread, Clint said, passing it through the bars. My wife baked it this morning. Mateo accepted the offering, noting the shame. In his neighbor's downturned eyes, much obliged. Clint? Listen, Mateo. Clint's voice roughened. Those things I said before, about you siding with, well, I was wrong to speak that way. He glanced toward Daniel's cell. Maybe you're right about all this. Coulter's been pushing folks around, making threats. Got me thinking about what's really going on. Truth has a way of surfacing, Mateo said quietly. Clint nodded, adjusting his hat. Well, you've got more friends out there than you might think. People are starting to ask questions. After Clint left, Mateo shared the bread with Daniel. They ate in companionable silence as the street outside continued its restless debate. That night, sleep came easier despite the hard cot, and his dreams... Mateo heard Sarah's voice, clear as spring water. Stand firm, my love. God's hand is moving. Moving. He woke to pale dawn light striping the cell floor. Something had shifted in the town's mood. He could sense it in the deputies' uncertain glances, in the changed tone of voices outside. The trial still loomed ahead, but hope was stirring, like early wildflowers pushing through desert sand. How are you feeling? He called softly to Daniel. Stronger, came the reply. The people, they're beginning to listen. Yes, Mateo said. They are. The town hall buzzed with tension as morning light filtered through its dusty windows. Mateo limped down the center aisle, his legs stiff from jail time, supported by Reverend Cole's steady arm. Farmers, merchants, and railroad workers packed the wooden benches, their whispers falling silent as Judge Harrison entered. Daniel sat at the defense table, shoulders straight despite his fear. His sister Maria clutched a worn shawl in the front row, her eyes never leaving her brother. Sheriff Briggs stood near the door, hand on his gun belt, watching for trouble. Coulter rose first, his suit pristine despite the hall's dust. He painted Daniel as a dangerous fugitive, speaking of progress in civilization with practiced smoothness. His words drew knowing nods from some railroad men, but many townspeople shifted uneasily. When Mateo's turn came, he stood carefully, joints protesting. His voice carried clear and strong through the hall. I've known honest men all my life, he began. I've seen truth in their eyes and lies in their smiles. This boy, he gestured to Daniel, came to my door hurt and hungry, but he never spoke false. The railroad's greed drove him there, not guilt. Coulter's face darkened. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant's guilt is clear. A motion from the back of the hall interrupted him. Raphael, the railroad's cook, rose slowly from his bench. His weathered hands trembled, but his voice held firm. Center Judge, I must speak. Judge Harrison leaned forward. You have evidence in this matter? Si. Raphael stepped into the aisle. I saw everything that night. The foreman, he cornered the girl. When Daniel tried to protect his sister, another man, Jim Hawkins, struck the killing blow. I saw it clear as day. The hall erupted. Coulter's face went pale. This is nonsense. Your Honor, a cook's word against your schemes? Clint Hobbs stood up. We've all seen how you operate, Coulter. Judge Harrison banged his gavel until quiet returned. He studied Raphael's earnest face, then Daniel's steady gaze, and finally Mateo's weathered features. Having heard this testimony, the judge declared, and given the evidence of railroad interference, I hereby dismiss all charges against Daniel. This court finds no cause for his arrest or detention. Maria burst into tears of joy. Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief as townspeople surrounded him with congratulations. Coulter grabbed his hat and stormed toward the door. His carefully constructed plan lying in ruins behind him. Mateo watched him go, then turned to Raphael. Thank you for your courage. The cook smiled slightly. Truth must be spoken, even when it frightens us. The autumn breeze carried the scent of sage as Mateo guided his horse along the well-worn trail. 2 weeks had passed since the trial, and peace had settled over the territory like morning dew. The bay mare, now called Mercy, walked with a proud step, her coat gleaming from proper care and good feed. Daniel rode beside him on a sturdy pinto, his shoulders relaxed in a way Mateo had never seen before. The young man's family had reclaimed their grazing rights, protected now by documents Judge Harrison had signed himself. Maria had planted a small garden near their cabin, herbs and squash already sprouting in neat rows. Reverend Cole joined them. On this particular afternoon, his gentle voice carrying as he spoke of the schoolhouse rising board by board near the reservation boundary. The children need education, he said, and understanding grows when we learn together. The trail wound past scattered cottonwoods, their leaves shimmering gold in the afternoon light. Ahead, the sound of hammering echoed across the valley. The schoolhouse took shape, Simple walls, a tin roof, and wide windows to catch the morning sun. Several Apache families worked alongside townspeople, their shared labor bridging old divisions as they approached. Children playing in the yard spotted them. Little ones waved excitedly, some calling Daniel's name. He smiled, raising his hand. In greeting, Mateo noticed how the boy's eyes shone with pride, no longer shadowed by fear. "My sister will teach some days," Daniel said quietly. "She knows both languages. The little ones trust her." Mateo nodded, remembering Maria's gentle strength. She helped them find their way. They dismounted to inspect the progress. Reverend Cole walked the perimeter, praising the solid foundation. Daniel spoke with several elders in Apache, translating their suggestions about where to plant shade trees. Come spring, Mateo stood back, watching it all unfold. The scene before him filled an empty place in his heart, one that had ached since his wife's passing. Here was purpose, here was healing, here was the future she would have cherished. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, they mounted up for home. The evening light painted the hills in deep purple and gold, while overhead, the first stars emerged like scattered diamonds. Mercy's hooves fell in a steady rhythm, matching the peace in Mateo's heart. He thought about that desperate morning weeks ago, finding a chained horse and a cruel note. God's ways were mysterious indeed. How that moment of cruelty had led to such blessing. The Mar had brought him back to what mattered most, standing for truth, defending the innocent, building bridges between people. Mateo reached down to pat Mercy's warm neck. "Thank you, old girl," he whispered. His prayer rose silent but sincere, gratitude filling his chest for renewed faith, for justice served, and for the family he'd found in unexpected places. The Mare nickered softly as if adding her own thanks to his. Behind them the schoolhouse stood as a promise. Before them the trail led home, and in Mateo's heart his wife's words echoed still. "Do right, even when it costs you." The price had been worth every penny. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.